Imagine stepping off a dusty stagecoach in the scorching sun, your heart pounding with dreams of a new life and a fresh start. Now picture the moment you realize the man you traveled hundreds of miles to marry is already bound to someone else, and the entire town knows it. That's what happened to Nora Thompson, a mail-order bride who left everything behind in St. Louis for the promise of a grand ranch and a loving husband in Dry Gulch, Arizona territory. But fate had something far more complicated in store: scandal, betrayal, and a determined sheriff with an offer she simply couldn't refuse. Nora Thompson had always been a dreamer. Growing up in the crowded neighborhoods of St. Louis, she possessed a restless spirit that refused to be tamed by factory work or the predictability of daily life. She yearned for open skies, for a horizon unbounded by brick walls and smoky rooftops. By 18, she'd grown weary of the gossip and the stale ambitions of her old community. When she came across a mail-order bride advertisement posted by a rancher named Jameson Jim Beckett from Dry Gulch, Arizona territory, she seized upon the idea without hesitation. Jim's letters painted vivid pictures: sunsets casting the desert in a golden glow, the sweet scent of sagebrush after rare monsoon rains, and a home that awaited her on the frontier, a place where she would be respected and never go hungry. Hungry not just for food, but for opportunity. Nora gathered what few belongings she could afford to keep. She sold nearly everything else, including heirlooms she'd once thought precious, but which had become anchors to a life she desperately wanted to leave behind. All she kept was a small trunk containing her mother's locket, a single Sunday dress, and the hope that this new life would be the answer to her fervent prayers. The journey west was a trial of endurance. She rode a train from St. Louis to Santa Fe, cramped among strangers, and kept awake by the clanking of wheels on iron rails. She pored over Jim's letters by lamplight, the promise of love and security, propelling her onward despite her nerves. When she finally reached Santa Fe, she learned she'd have to wait 3 days for the next stagecoach heading west toward the smaller, more remote towns. Nora was not alone in her wait. She befriended a traveling merchant named Bill Watkins, who told her grand tales of the frontier. Bill boasted he once crossed paths with the lawman Wyatt Earp in Tombstone, regaling her with stories of shootouts and how quicksilver decisions could determine life or death. Though thrilling, his stories served as a reminder that the Wild West was not for the faint of heart. Undeterred, Nora boarded the stagecoach to Dry Gulch at dawn on the 4th day. For hours the carriage jostled along rocky roads, framed by towering red buttes and endless desert. The scorching sun turned the air stifling, and each bump nearly sent her trunk tumbling to the floor. Yet she clutched Jim's latest letter, reminding herself that at the end of the ordeal waited the man who had so passionately vowed to love and care for her. Finally, late in the afternoon, the stagecoach rolled into Dry Gulch. The place was a scatter of wooden buildings along a single main street. A saloon with swinging doors, a modest church with a thin steeple, and a handful of shops made up what passed for the town's hub. Stepping off the stage, Nora was greeted by a blast of hot wind and a swirl of dust that stung her eyes. She glanced around, searching for a tall, broad-shouldered man with sandy hair, exactly how Jim had described himself. But no one rushed forward. No one waved a sign bearing her name. No one lifted a hat with a warm, welcoming smile. A knot of apprehension formed in her stomach. She might have assumed he was merely delayed, except the stares from the handful of bystanders told her something was amiss. One man doffed his hat politely, but it was more out of pity than genuine welcome. Nora clenched the handle of her trunk, trying to quell the rising panic. She approached the local hotel and asked the wiry, bespectacled proprietor, Mr. Wilson, if he knew Jim Beckett. He paused, rubbing his chin, then advised her to see the sheriff. Nora's heart fluttered with fear. Why would she need the sheriff to find her fiancé? Nevertheless, she set her jaw and followed his directions down the street. The sheriff's office was a modest wooden structure with a single window facing the dusty thoroughfare. Her nerves jangled with every step. Little did she know this confrontation would mark the first step in an unforeseen journey that would change her life and the entire town forever. Nora's trepidation grew as she entered the sheriff's office. She found a middle-aged man, lean with sharp eyes, seated behind a cluttered desk. A silver badge pinned to his vest glinted in the lamplight. He looked up, set down his pen, and rose to greet her. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat in a show of manners. "I'm Sheriff Franklin Wade. How can I help you?" Nora drew a breath to steady herself. "I'm Nora Thompson, sir. I've come to Dry Gulch to meet well to marry Mr. Jameson Beckett." She cleared her throat, fingers worrying the edge of her skirt. "He and I have been corresponding. I expected him to greet me at the stage, but he wasn't there. Mr. Wilson at the hotel suggested I speak to you." Sheriff Wade's expression shifted from polite curiosity to something more serious. He gestured for her to sit. "I'm afraid you've been misled, Miss Thompson," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "Jim Beckett is a resident here, that's true. But he's already married." Nora stiffened, as though struck by lightning. That can't be," she stammered. "He's the one who sent for me. We've been writing for months." The sheriff passed her a worn piece of paper. "Mrs. Mary Beckett came to me with this. It's a letter from Jim to you, which she discovered among his things. She's known he was up to no good, but she didn't realize he'd actually arranged for you to travel all the way here. She wanted to warn you, but you arrived sooner than she expected." Disbelief warred with anger in Nora's chest. She'd risked everything to answer Jim's call. She'd left home, spent her savings, and pinned her hopes on a future that had vanished in an instant. Heat rose to her cheeks and her vision blurred. Why would he do this? Why mislead me? Sheriff Wade shook his head grimly. Likely for the same reason he's found himself in other messes. Money troubles, questionable deals. He's been known to do foolish things, but this is low, even by his standards. He leaned forward. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson. You've been wronged. The question is, what do you plan to do? Now." Nora felt numb. I have nowhere else to go," she whispered. "I spent the last of my savings to get here." The sheriff pressed his lips together, sympathy and frustration mingling in his gaze. "We're a small town. You might find work at the boarding house as a cook or a maid at the hotel. It's not much, but it would put a roof over your head." Her stomach clenched at the thought of menial work in an unfamiliar place. She didn't shirk hard labor, but the betrayal still stung. She'd come here to start a life as someone's wife and partner, not to scrub floors for pennies. At the same time, she had no wish to return to St. Louis with nothing but shame. Sheriff Wade exhaled, weighing something in his mind. "There is another option," he said at length. "I've been running this office alone ever since my deputy left to chase gold up north, between rustlers, land disputes, and rowdy saloons. I could use some help, even if it's just filing, running errands, and minding the jail when I'm called away." Nora blinked, caught off guard. "You'd hire me? But I don't know the first thing about law enforcement." He offered a small, encouraging smile. "Consider it more of an administrative role. Keep records, send telegraphs, assist me with day-to-day tasks. I'll pay you fair wages. It's not the life you expected, but it's honest work. And given the situation, I suspect you could use a steady job." Her pride balked at the notion of stepping into a role so far from what she'd imagined. But the alternative, scrubbing floors and saving for months to escape, felt bleak. If nothing else, working in the sheriff's office would grant her some independence. It might even give her a chance to confront Jim Beckett and demand explanations or compensation. Nora drew in a shaky breath. "I'll consider it, Sheriff. But first I want to confront Jim myself. He owes me an explanation." Sheriff Wade nodded. "I had a feeling you'd say that. If you wish to head out to his ranch, I'll escort you. I don't trust him not to spin another lie or cause trouble." Though anxiety twisted her stomach, Nora lifted her chin. "Tomorrow morning, then," she said. "I need to see for myself what sort of man I've been writing to." And so, with a sinking heart and a swirl of indignation fueling her resolve, she left the sheriff's office. The waning sunlight bathed Dry Gulch in a copper hue. She passed the saloon where boisterous laughter spilled onto the streets and the silent storefronts now shuttered for the evening. None of it felt welcoming. Instead, it seemed like a stage set for a drama into which she'd been thrust without warning. She found lodging at the boarding house on Sheriff Wade's recommendation. Over a modest dinner of stew, she grappled with her roiling emotions. A few hours earlier, she'd been brimming with hopeful anticipation. Now she was lodged in a tiny, squeaking bed in a strange town, bearing the humiliating truth that her so-called fiancé was already married. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, she dreamed of riding across a vast desert, chasing a mirage of a man who always stayed just out of reach. She woke in the grey pre-dawn light, tears staining her cheeks, the echoes of betrayal throbbing in her chest. Little did she know her path was diverging in ways she couldn't yet comprehend, setting her on a course that would test her mettle far beyond heartbreak and draw her deeper into the heart of Dry Gulch's secrets. Morning arrived, crisp and cloudless, the desert sun already warming the air by the time Nora and Sheriff Wade mounted horses at the livery stable. Nora hadn't been on horseback since she was a small girl, and the horses' sway both unnerved and thrilled her. They set off along a rough dirt trail leading west of town. Cacti and dusty sage dotted the landscape. The horizon stretched out endlessly, broken only by rocky mesas in the distance. Despite the tension curling in her gut, Nora couldn't help but marvel at the rugged beauty around her. It was so different from the crowded streets of St. Louis, where buildings boxed in the sky. After nearly 2 hours of riding under the relentless sun, they arrived at a modest ranch enclosed by a sagging wooden fence. A small house stood alongside a weather-beaten barn. As they approached, Nora's pulse raced. A man stepped out from the barn, tall, broad-shouldered, sandy-haired. Jim Beckett. At once she recognized traces of the man from the letters, yet the reality of his features brought a new wave of emotion: anger, regret, betrayal. He froze upon seeing her with the sheriff. With a wary glance, he removed his work gloves and walked to the fence eyes, darting nervously between Nora and Wade. "Nora," he greeted, voice taut. "I didn't expect you to come here." She swung down from the horse, heart pounding. "I came for answers," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Why would you propose marriage if you already have a wife?" Jim cast a desperate look at the sheriff, who offered no help. Finally, he sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "It got out of hand," he muttered. "I wrote those letters when Mary and I were on bad terms. I considered leaving her, but then we patched things up. I never expected you to arrive." Nora's anger flared. "So you thought a simple letter announcing you'd changed your mind was too much trouble? You let me sell my belongings, travel halfway across the country, only to leave me abandoned at the stagecoach." He looked down, scuffing the dirt with his boot. "I'm not proud of myself, Nora. I swear I never meant for you to be stranded." Sheriff Wade interjected, arms folded across his chest. "You must see how your actions have left her in a dire position, Jim. It's worse than mere confusion. It's fraud." Jim's cheeks reddened. "I can give you some money to help you get by. Just don't make trouble with Mary. If she finds out the full story, she'll leave me for sure." Nora felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Your concern is for your marriage? You think a few dollars can fix what you did to me?" He had the decency to look ashamed, but any sympathy she might have felt dissolved under the weight of his betrayal. Sheriff Wade took the reins figuratively and literally. "We'll settle this matter in a civilized way," he said. "But make no mistake, Jim. You owe Nora more than excuses. If she decides to press charges, I'll have to bring you in." "Don't," Jim pleaded, hands shaking. "Mary wouldn't." "That's enough," Nora cut in, voice wavering. She didn't care to hear his hollow excuses or watch him scramble to preserve his marriage. "I've heard all I need to hear." She turned to the sheriff. "I want to leave." They mounted up and rode out without another word. If Jim Beckett called after them. Nora didn't hear it above the pounding of her own heartbeat. The ride back to Dry Gulch was silent, save for the horse's hooves. Tears stung Nora's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd been humiliated, yes, but she still had her pride, and perhaps the sheriff's offer. Though it hardly replaced the dream she'd lost, it was something to hold on to. Once they reached town, Nora dismounted and handed the reins back to the liveryman. Sheriff Wade touched her arm gently. "I'm sorry," he said. "You deserved better." She swallowed, forcing down the knot in her throat. "I accept your job offer, Sheriff, if that's still open." "It is," he replied, voice soft but resolute. "First thing tomorrow, then. We'll get you started." She nodded, her whole body exhausted from disappointment and the long ride. She retreated to her room at the boarding house, where she collapsed onto the narrow bed. Finally away from prying eyes, she let the tears come in a silent flood. She clutched her mother's locket, mourning the life that would never be. Yet somewhere amidst that sorrow, a thread of determination kept her from sinking into despair. If Jim Beckett's betrayal had taught her anything, it was that she needed to rely on her own strength now. No one else. That next morning, Nora awoke to a sense of grim resolve. She brushed out her hair, donned her plain grey dress, and reported to the sheriff's office. She found Wade examining a battered ledger, a cup of steaming coffee by his side. "Morning, Nora," he greeted with a kind smile. "Ready to get started?" Despite her nerves, she mustered a polite nod. "Yes, Sheriff. Thank you for giving me this chance." He rose, waving her to follow him around the small office. "I'm running this place single-handed." My deputy left for the gold fields, and it's been chaos ever since. Rustlers, bar fights, and a range war brewing between rival ranchers. The paperwork alone piles up faster than I can file it. Nora scanned the disorganized piles of wanted posters, telegrams, and witness statements. I can sort these, she offered, rolling up her sleeves. Make sure warrants are up-to-date statements properly stored. I might need some guidance about how you prefer them ordered. Wade nodded. Of course. Let's start with the simplest categorizing open and closed cases. Then we'll see about the rest. She set to work, grateful for the distraction from her heartbreak. The first few hours were spent learning the telegraph, deciphering the office shorthand, and tidying battered paperwork. Sheriff Wade occasionally stepped outside to check on a dispute or to eyeball the occasional drunk stumbling through the street. Each time he returned, he'd tip his hat in her direction, as though silently thanking her for bringing some semblance of order to the chaos. By midday, the dusty wooden floor was finally visible, and the clutter had been sorted into labeled stacks. Nora sighed with relief, dusting her hands. Though it was hardly glamorous, the work gave her a renewed sense of self-worth. She was contributing to something bigger, keeping law and order in a town that sorely needed it. She and the sheriff took a break at noon, stepping out into the glaring sun to buy lunch from the nearby cafe. As they ate at a small outdoor table, passers-by eyed Nora curiously. She overheard whispers. That's the Beckett girl, and here she's working for the sheriff now. She set her jaw, refusing to shrink under their stares. She'd committed no crime. If the townspeople wanted to gossip, that was their affair. Sheriff Wade, noticing her discomfort, cleared his throat. Folks will talk, he said gently, but they'll find someone else to gossip about soon enough. Dry Gulch is like that. She offered him a fleeting smile. Let them talk. I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere until I'm good and ready. He chuckled, though his next words carried a quiet gravity. I admire that spirit. They finished their meal in amiable silence. When they returned to the office, a flurry of excitement awaited them. A young woman with tear-streaked cheeks burst through the door, pleading for the sheriff's help. Her husband had been shot on the outskirts of town, an apparent ambush. In a flash, Sheriff Wade was all business, grabbing his hat and revolver. The frantic wife begged Nora to come as well, not wanting to face the scene alone. Though fear clutched at her heart, Nora agreed. They hurried to the edge of town, where the victim lay bleeding but alive. Wade worked quickly to assess the situation, while Nora cradled the man's head, speaking soothing words to keep him conscious. By the time they got him onto a makeshift stretcher and carried him to Doc Evans's office, Nora's dress was stained with blood, and her adrenaline coursed hot and fast. Late that evening, they learned the man would survive. Sheriff Wade concluded this was likely tied to a bitter land dispute involving a prominent rancher named Thomas Hastings. Tension over property lines and water rights had been simmering, leading to threats and violence. Nora watched the sheriff's face darken as he realized how deep this trouble ran, and how vulnerable the townspeople were to men like Hastings. Sinking into a chair at the office, Nora exhaled shakily. This is all much more than I bargained for. Wade leaned against the desk, a grim set to his jaw. The West can be harsh, but I'm grateful you're here, Nora. Truly. I've been stretched too thin. She managed a small, tired smile. I'll do whatever I can to help. And for the first time since her arrival, she felt a flicker of purpose beyond her personal heartbreak. This town had real problems, ones that demanded courage, organization, and a determination to see justice done. Over the coming days, She threw herself into her work, collecting statements from witnesses, typing up official forms and manning the telegraph to send updates about the shooting to the nearest law offices. The more she learned about Dry Gulch, the more she realized Jim Beckett's betrayal was only one of many troubles in this corner of the frontier. Still, with every witness she interviewed and every piece of evidence she filed, she felt a growing satisfaction, though she'd never set out to be on the side of the law. It felt strangely right, and so Nora began to see that the sheriff's offer was more than just an escape from her predicament. It was a chance to stand for something. She might have come to Dry Gulch in pursuit of love and stability, but she was finding a different kind of purpose, one that would test her mettle far more than any marriage might have done. The days stretched into weeks as Nora immersed herself in the sheriff's office. The shooting of Hank Miller, the ranch hand ambushed over the land dispute, was just the beginning. Sheriff Wade and Nora pieced together testimonies from frightened residents who hinted at extortion, bribery, and intimidation tactics. Time and again, the name Thomas Hastings surfaced, a wealthy rancher known for his influential reach and willingness to do whatever it took to protect his assets. Though the townspeople spoke in hushed tones, the stories they told painted a vivid picture of a man who bought favors from traveling judges, intimidated witnesses, and paid off hired guns to keep the locals in line. Dry Gulch, it seemed, had been living under Hastings' quiet grip for far too long. Nora's filing system made the patterns clearer. She and Sheriff Wade carefully compiled a list of incidents, complaints, injuries, even missing persons, many of which seemed tied to Hastings or his associates. But rumors and circumstantial evidence wouldn't be enough to convict a man of his stature. They needed solid proof records of illicit transactions or direct witness statements that couldn't be refuted. "I'll send a message to the U.S. Marshal in Tucson," Sheriff Wade declared one late afternoon. "See if they can send reinforcements or at least open a formal investigation. But until they do, we lie low. If Hastings catches wind of what we're up to, he might tighten his grip." Nora nodded, worry gnawing at her. Hastings wasn't a man to be trifled with, and the town felt on edge as rumors of accidents circulated. Ranchers who opposed him seemed more prone to break-ins, sudden barn fires, or outright assault. Nora found herself checking over her shoulder whenever she walked down the street, half expecting one of Hastings's men to appear. Amid the escalating tension, she still grappled with the unresolved humiliation involving Jim Beckett. He avoided her, but their paths occasionally crossed in town. She saw the shame in his eyes, quickly masked by defensiveness. She tried to banish her lingering anger toward him. Her life was busy enough without reopening that wound. And then, in an unexpected twist, Mary Beckett came to the sheriff's office. Nora tensed, uncertain of what Jim's wife might want. But Mary's face was etched with worry when she asked to speak to her in private. Sheriff Wade allowed it, stepping outside. Mary twisted her hands anxiously. "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, in a trembling voice. "But I don't know who else to trust. I've discovered something about Jim. It's about money he owes, and it's tied to Hastings." Nora's heart thumped. She remembered the rumors about Jim's debts, but she'd never pressed for details. "I'm listening." Mary lowered her gaze, clearly embarrassed. Jim's borrowed heavily from Hastings over the past year. Gambling debts, back taxes on the ranch, who knows what else. Hastings demanded Jim do favors, deliver messages, spread misinformation, maybe worse. I think Jim got in over his head. It's eating him alive. Nora's anger flared. So that's why he wrote to me. He was desperate and thought marrying someone with a little money could help. Mary nodded, eyes welling with tears. I believe so. I only discovered a ledger in his study that detailed the payments loans from Hastings and sums Jim had to repay at brutal interest. It included notes about tasks Jim performed. I'm afraid Hastings could twist Jim's arm into something truly criminal. Nora's mind raced. Mary, if this ledger exists, it could be the key to linking Hastings to everything else going on. That's exactly why I came to you, Mary said, voice trembling. I fear Jim will destroy the ledger if he gets cornered. He's so desperate. But if that ledger fell into Sheriff Wade's hands, it might help you prove Hastings' guilt. It could bring him down for good. Nora stared at Mary, conflicted. They had never been friends. In another life, Mary was the woman who'd unwittingly robbed Nora of a future. But the fear in Mary's eyes was genuine. Her husband had wronged both women, and it seemed he was now a pawn in Hastings's dangerous game. I can't just barge in and steal it, Nora said hesitantly. Legally, we'd need a warrant to search his home. Mary swallowed hard. I know. I'm not asking you to break the law. But if there was some way you could see it copy the crucial details or something. Jim might be beyond saving, but if it stops Hastings, it's worth it. Nora studied the woman's trembling hands. She exhaled slowly, then nodded. Let me talk to the sheriff. We'll figure out the proper way to handle this. That evening, Sheriff Wade weighed the risk. The local judge wouldn't be in town for another 2 weeks, and by then, the ledger could be gone. Going through official channels meant delay. Finally, he turned to Nora with a resolute expression. We'll try to get that ledger, but it has to be discreet. We can't let Hastings catch wind, or we'll lose our shot. And so a plan formed. Under the guise of returning some items Jim had left at the sheriff's office, old paperwork from a minor altercation earlier in the year, Nora would ask to speak with him. Meanwhile, Mary would leave the study door unlocked. If all went well, Nora could slip in, locate the ledger copy, or memorize key evidence, and slip out without Jim knowing. Nora couldn't ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach. This wasn't just running errands or filing papers. This was infiltration prying into Jim's private possessions. Yet if it helped bring down Hastings and save countless others from violence and intimidation, she felt morally compelled to do it. The plan unfolded one tense night, with the moon hanging low and silver in the desert sky. Nora rode out alone, carefully dismounting near the Beckett ranch. She spied Mary's faint lantern light by the barn, a silent signal that Jim was distracted. Slinking around the side of the house, Nora found the door to the study ajar. Her heart hammered as she slipped inside. The study smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. She tried not to think about the personal, intimate nature of Jim's secrets. Carefully, she rummaged through drawers until she discovered a slim ledger with precise notations. Hastily flipping through the pages, she glimpsed references to TH, along with amounts of money borrowed, and repaid some with chilling side notes, like services rendered. This was it, proof linking Jim's debts to Hastings. Just then, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Panic seized her. She glanced around, mind racing. Could it be Mary? Or had Jim come to investigate? Her heart thudded as the doorknob turned. With no time to hide, she pressed herself against the wall behind the door. Jim stepped in, muttering to himself. He lit a lamp, and in that faint glow, Nora saw the strain on his face. He crossed the room, heading straight for the desk. She clutched the ledger behind her back, praying he wouldn't notice her shadow. Mary's voice called out from beyond the door. Jim, could you come here for a moment? It's urgent. Jim paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Give me a minute," he called. Nora held her breath, each second an eternity. Finally, he turned on his heel and left. Releasing a silent, shaky exhale, Nora eased out of her hiding place. She replaced the ledger in the drawer, but kept a page she'd hastily torn out, the one with Hastings' scrawled initials and a damning list of sums. She pressed it under her blouse. Grateful Mary had provided a diversion at just the right time. Slipping out the side door, Nora made her way back to the barn where Mary waited anxiously. She touched Nora's arm, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Nora merely nodded, too rattled to speak. She mounted her horse and rode away, the damning evidence hidden close to her heart. That night, she delivered the torn page to Sheriff Wade, who read it in grim silence. It was enough, he said, to tie Jim Beckett to Hastings. But it was also enough to show exactly how Hastings roped men into his orbit through insurmountable debt and blackmail. They now had a tangible thread to unravel the sinister web ensnaring Dry Gulch. Neither of them slept well. They sensed the danger they'd unleashed. If Hastings discovered they possessed proof of his wrongdoing, he wouldn't hesitate to strike. As the night pressed on, both Nora and Sheriff Wade knew their next moves would make them a target. But the risk was worth it if they could finally end the reign of a man who had corrupted their town. Their only hope was to keep the ledger page safe, gather more evidence, and pray the U.S. Marshal could intervene before violence erupted on an even larger scale. In the tense days that followed, the town braced itself as though expecting a storm. Word of Hank Miller's slow recovery spread, along with rumors that Hank was prepared to testify against Thomas Hastings. Nora noticed a hard glint of fear in many townspeople's eyes. They had seen enough intimidation to know a cornered predator often struck hardest. Sheriff Wade secured the incriminating ledger page in the office safe, a heavy iron box bolted to the floor. He doubled his patrols around town, even as his deputy's absence left him short-handed. Nora became his de facto partner, armed with a rifle, though she had never once fired a gun at a living target. Her hands shook the first time he pressed it into her arms, but his firm nod of reassurance emboldened her. Hastings himself was rarely seen. The few times he appeared, it was with a retinue of armed men. He'd tip his hat coolly to Sheriff Wade, as though nothing was amiss. Yet his eyes gleamed with silent threats. Nora's skin crawled whenever he passed a man who radiated controlled menace. One scorching afternoon, while Nora was reorganizing some old witness statements, the sheriff rushed in with a telegraph. From the marshal's office, he said, scanning the lines, "They're delayed. Another manhunt keeps them tied up for at least another week." Nora's stomach twisted. A week was an eternity, when Hastings' men grew bolder by the day. Already there had been a nighttime break-in at the local post office, presumably searching for incriminating documents. A ranch on the outskirts reported missing livestock, another sign Hastings aimed to sow fear. "We'll do our best to keep the peace," the sheriff said quietly, setting the telegraph aside. "In the meantime, stay vigilant. Don't walk alone after dark." Nora nodded, trying to steady the butterflies in her stomach. Yet that very night, trouble came knocking sooner than expected. She had finished her tasks and was preparing to lock up the sheriff's office when shouts rang out on the street. A figure raced up the boardwalk screaming, "Sheriff, fire Hastings' men, set fire to." A thunderous crash cut them off. Nora threw the door open, rifle in hand. At the far end of the street, orange flames devoured an old warehouse next to the feed store. Townsfolk ran with buckets, but the blaze roared, sparks flying skyward. Through the wail of wind and fire, Nora heard gunshots, warning shots, or an assault she couldn't tell. Sheriff Wade barreled out of his back room, strapping on his gun belt. They rushed into the chaos, weaving through smoke-choked air. 2 masked men lurked in the shadows behind the building, guns drawn. Upon seeing the sheriff, they opened fire. Nora's heart pounded as she ducked behind a water trough, bullets splintering wood around her. Wade returned fire, forcing the masked figures to retreat, but in the confusion, they vanished into the darkness. Townspeople frantically threw bucket after bucket of water onto the blaze, eventually taming the inferno. Soot-streaked and coughing from the smoke, Nora realized this was no random act of vandalism. It was a warning. Hastings was making a statement that he wouldn't hesitate to torch the town if he sensed it closing in on him. Exhausted and shaken, the sheriff and Nora spent hours investigating. Witnesses saw men sneaking around, but none could identify them definitively. Not for the first time, Nora wondered if she was in over her head, but she resolved to stand firm, remembering the battered ranchers who had no one else to protect them. Back at the sheriff's office, both were too restless to sleep. The safe remained closed, but they knew Hastings's men could try to break in at any moment. Over a pot of bitter coffee, they reviewed their evidence. "We need more," Wade said, voice hollow. "A single ledger page might not be enough. They'll claim it's fabricated, or that Jim Beckett wrote it under duress." Nora rubbed her tired eyes. "Mary said Jim keeps a full ledger," she murmured. "But we only took 1 page." Wade nodded grimly. Getting the rest would be a risk. Jim might have destroyed it by now. Or Hastings could have it. He paused, meeting her gaze. "We may not have a choice. If we don't act, Hastings will tighten the noose on this town." She shuddered, picturing more fires, more ambushes. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll do whatever it takes." The next day they discovered another grim sign. Lou, one of Hastings's ranch hands, who'd secretly confided in the sheriff about suspicious activities, had vanished along with his family. Their modest home burned to the ground. Every new incident drummed home the reality that Hastings was a cornered animal striking out viciously. Nora went about her tasks with a knot in her gut, aware that every dusty footstep behind her might be a hired gun. Mrs. Clara Wilson, the hotel owner's wife, took Nora aside one afternoon. "Child, you look pale as a ghost," she said, softly, pressing a cup of tea into her hands. "Don't let these men break you. We're all rooting for you and the sheriff." Nora forced a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I'm trying my best." But the question weighed on her: how far was she willing to go? She'd come here seeking marriage and security, yet found herself at the heart of a dangerous conflict. Every fiber of her being wanted. Hastings and his reign of terror ended, but at what cost? That night she left the sheriff's office after triple-checking the locks. As she hurried to the boarding house, she thought she caught a glimpse of a figure watching from across the street. She paused, heart hammering, but the figure vanished into an alley. She quickened her pace, feeling Hastings' silent presence loom over every shadow. One thing was certain: if they didn't act soon, it wouldn't just be stolen cattle or a burned warehouse. More people would get hurt, or worse. The chill in the desert air that evening felt like an omen, as though the entire town braced for the final strike of a deadly snake coiled in the darkness. The tension finally snapped late one night when 2 masked men stormed the sheriff's office. Nora had stayed behind to finish paperwork, while Sheriff Wade was out responding to a disturbance. The door burst open with a splintering crash, and before she could react, one of the intruders leveled a revolver at her. "Where's the ledger?" he snarled. The kerosene lamp on her desk wavered, casting flickering shadows across the room. Nora's heartbeat thundered in her ears. I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. The second man kicked over a filing cabinet, sending papers scattering. "Don't play dumb girl. We know you and the sheriff got evidence. Give it up or we'll tear this place apart." Nora's mind raced. The ledger page was locked in the safe. She prayed they hadn't brought dynamite. Stalling, she raised her hands, stepping back. All right. Just don't hurt me." They shoved her aside and descended on the safe, cursing when they found it locked. One fiddled with the combination, the other kept his gun trained on Nora. In that moment, the door banged open, and Sheriff Wade rushed in, revolver drawn. "Drop your weapons!" Gunfire erupted in a deafening roar. Sparks lit the darkness. Nora dove behind the desk, heart hammering as bullets whizzed overhead. She heard a pained cry. She wasn't sure whose. Then one of the men cursed, shouting, "Get out!" In a flash of movement, they fled, slamming the door behind them. She scrambled to her feet, hands shaking. The sheriff clutched his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're shot!" she gasped, racing to his side. He gritted his teeth, eyes dark with anger. "Just grazed." "They're after the safe. This is escalating too fast." Despite the pain, he staggered forward, pressing a hand to the wound. "We can't wait for the marshal anymore. We have to confront Hastings head-on, or he'll burn this town to the ground." Nora nodded, adrenaline surging. "If we go after him, we should go now before he regroups." With the sheriff's arm hastily bandaged, they saddled horses in the moonlight. Nora's heart pounded as they rode out of Dry Gulch in silence, heading toward Hastings' ranch. Word in town was that Hastings often met his hired guns at a secluded canyon nearby a hidden place where deals were made under darkness. Sure enough, as they approached, flickers of lantern light appeared like ghostly orbs dancing among the rocks. They hitched their horses behind some brush and crept forward on foot. The canyon walls loomed the moonlight, revealing shadowy silhouettes. Nora recognized Hastings' commanding stance. Around him milled a handful of men, some armed with rifles. Among them she spotted Jim Beckett. Her gut twisted. What was he doing here? Sheriff Wade gripped her shoulder. "Stay low," he whispered, wincing at the pain in his bandaged arm. "We don't want a shootout unless we have no choice." But just then, Hastings' voice boomed across the canyon, echoing off the walls. "You useless fool," he growled at Jim. "I lent you money, and you failed me. Your ledger ended up with the sheriff, and now look where we are." Jim cowered under Hastings' glare. I tried to fix it," he stammered. "But Mary, Nora, everyone got in the way." Hastings snarled, pointing a revolver at Jim's chest. "Your failures have jeopardized my entire operation. This ends tonight. Either you help me retrieve that ledger once and for all, or I leave your corpse for the coyotes." Nora's pulse raced. She and the sheriff were outnumbered, but they couldn't stand by while Hastings threatened Jim's life. Summoning her courage, she steadied her rifle. Sheriff Wade, his jaw set, lifted his own revolver. They exchanged a tense nod, then stepped out from behind the boulders. "It's over." "Hastings." Sheriff Wade's voice echoed clear and authoritative. "We have evidence of your crimes, and we have reinforcements on the way." Hastings spun lantern light flickering across his face, twisted with fury. "You," he spat. Drop your weapon or your friend Beckett dies right now." Nora aimed her rifle, refusing to yield. "Let him go, Hastings," she shouted, heart pounding. "There's no escape for you. Your men failed to get that ledger." A shadow passed across Hastings's features, and in the next heartbeat, chaos erupted. One of his men fired a shot that whizzed past Nora's ear, splintering a rock behind her. Sheriff Wade fired back, striking the gunman in the shoulder. Screams and shouts ricocheted off the canyon walls as the outlaws scrambled for cover bullets, sparking on stone. Nora flattened herself behind a boulder, reloading her rifle with trembling hands. Across the clearing, Jim dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding a hail of bullets. Hastings, too, found cover, unleashing shots with deadly accuracy. Dust filled the air, the smell of gunpowder thick as the night turned into a battlefield. Sheriff Wade let out a pained grunt. He'd been grazed again on his injured arm, but he kept firing. Nora's vision blurred with fear and adrenaline. She peered through the darkness, spotting Hastings reloading. With shaking hands, she aimed and fired. The muzzle flash lit her face. Hastings ducked the bullet, ricocheting off stone, but it was enough to force him to retreat. In the frenzy, Jim crawled toward the sheriff, shouting over the din, "I'll help." He grabbed a fallen revolver, took aim at one of Hastings' men, and fired. The shot found its mark, and the man yelped in awe. Jim, eyes wild, looked to Nora and the sheriff as though begging for forgiveness or redemption. Suddenly, Hastings rose from behind a rock, leveling his revolver. Nora froze, heart seizing. He was aiming at Jim's back. She tried to shout a warning, but the report of the gun rang out. Jim lurched, a cry tearing from his throat as he fell to the ground. No Mary Beckett's voice rang out. In the midst of the chaos, Mary appeared, having trailed them in desperation. She ran to Jim, tears streaming down her face. Bullets kicked dust around her feet as she dragged him behind cover. Hastings advanced, his face a mask of fury. Before he could squeeze the trigger again, Sheriff Wade fired, catching Hastings in the leg. With a strangled curse, the rancher collapsed, dropping his revolver. Nora rushed forward, rifle aimed at the trembling man, whose empire of fear was crumbling around him. "Thomas Hastings," she panted, forcing steel into her voice. "You're finished. Surrender." For a heartbeat, Hastings's eyes flickered with hatred, so raw that Nora felt ice slide down her spine. Then he sagged, perhaps realizing his fight was over, or that his men were in no position to help. One by one, they tossed their guns aside, pinned by the sheriff's aim and their own injuries. Mary sobbed over Jim's limp form, checking his wound. He was alive, but bleeding badly. Nora swallowed back tears. Even after everything he'd done, he didn't deserve to die like this. Sheriff Wade knelt, ignoring his own injuries to assess Jim. "We have to get him back to Doc Evans," he said grimly. The canyon fell silent save for the ragged breathing of the wounded. Lantern light flickered across drawn faces, revealing fear, regret, and the end of a reign of terror. The final shot had been fired. Hastings had lost, pinned to the dusty ground, awaiting the justice he'd long evaded. And Jim Beckett, the man who once promised Nora a new life, now lay in his wife's arms, paying a steep price for his entanglements. Nora eased the rifle down, exhaustion crashing over her like a tidal wave. She had never imagined herself in a battlefield of bullets and vengeance. Yet here she stood, the desert wind cooling her sweat-damp brow. A swirl of conflicting emotions flooded her relief that Hastings was defeated, horror at the violence, and a deep, unexpected sadness for everyone caught in his web. As the moon shone down on the battered canyon, Nora felt like she was standing at the crossroads of her life. She'd come west seeking love and stability. Instead, she'd found betrayal, danger, and her own wells of courage. And though the night was quiet now, she knew the aftermath of this showdown would echo through Dry Gulch for years to come. Dragging Thomas Hastings and his men back to Dry Gulch in the dead of night felt like hauling the weight of a war. Sheriff Wade, bleeding and grim-faced, insisted on escorting the prisoners himself. Jim Beckett, unconscious and pale, lay in another wagon with Mary at his side. Nora rode behind, numb and dust-covered, the adrenaline of the battle long faded. They had saved a town, but the cost had been steep. As dawn broke over Dry Gulch, townsfolk gathered silently, whispers rippling through the crowd. Hastings was captured. Doc Evans rushed to tend to the wounded, and despite his injuries, Sheriff Wade stayed on his feet until Hastings and his men were secured in the jail cell. The clanging of the lock echoed like a final verdict. Exhausted Nora dropped into a chair. Victory had never felt so heavy. Sheriff Wade, slumped beside his desk, gave her a tired nod. "We did it. Hastings will face trial. The marshal's on his way." She looked at him, bandaged, blood-stained, but resolute, and her chest ached with admiration. "Thank you for trusting me when I had nothing." He smiled faintly. "You saved my life more than once, Nora. It's I who owe you." Before she could reply, Mary rushed in, eyes red. "Jim's alive. Doc says he might recover." Slowly. Relief flickered across her face, tangled with sorrow. Sheriff Wade nodded solemnly. "He'll still face charges." "I know," Mary whispered. "But maybe the judge will be lenient." There was no clear answer to that. Mary turned to Nora, guilt in her voice. "I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry." "You did what mattered," Nora said, placing a hand on her arm. "Now it's time to heal." After Mary left, Nora helped the sheriff to the back room, carefully cleaning his wounds. The sight of him so vulnerable stirred a quiet protectiveness in her. When their eyes met in the soft lamplight, something unspoken passed between them, a bond forged through fire. Later, as she sat alone at the desk, she watched Hastings, silent and sullen in his cell. He was finally powerless. The town could breathe again. Over the next few days, peace returned. The marshal arrived. Hastings was taken into custody, and Dry Gulch began to mend. The townsfolk smiled more easily. Clara Wilson even joked about opening a bakery, now that life had quieted. Jim's trial followed. Still weak, he stood to face the judge. Nora testified, confirming his involvement. Mary pleaded for understanding, and Sheriff Wade gave context about Hastings's coercion. The sentence was lenient but firm, several years in prison. Mary wept, but thanked them all. That night, Nora walked the quiet main street, lanterns glowing gently in the windows. Her heart was calm. She had come west, searching for love, and instead found her place in a town worth fighting for. Back at the sheriff's office, Wade looked up as she entered. "I wondered if you'd come." She smiled softly. "Couldn't stay away." Their eyes held for a long, warm moment. This wasn't the future she had planned, but it was one she had earned. Weeks after Hastings' arrest and Jim Beckett's sentencing, Dry Gulch began to breathe again. Once muted ranchers held open meetings about land fairness. Saloon patrons laughed without fear, and families walked Main Street with a newfound ease. Nora remained at the sheriff's office, now a steady part of the town's daily rhythm. She'd learned to handle a revolver not expertly, but enough to carry one with confidence. She organized case files, dated disputes, and slowly shed the title of mail-order bride in favor of something more fitting lawkeeper. What surprised her most was how natural things began to feel between her and Sheriff Wade. They shared long talks during quiet hours, discussing the town's future, their pasts, and dreams they'd once buried. Their bond had grown silently rooted in mutual respect, forged under fire. One afternoon, a letter from her sister arrived. Beatrice, writing from Kansas City, spoke of financial struggles and their mother's initial disapproval. But her tone softened. Word of Nora's courage had reached them, and pride now mingled with worry. Reading the letter, Nora felt the tug of two worlds, her roots and her new life. That evening, Clara Wilson hosted a modest gathering at the hotel to celebrate the town's return to peace. Lanterns swung above the tables, and fiddle music danced on the desert breeze. Clara had lent Nora a sage green dress, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something like herself again. Sheriff Wade appeared at her side, dressed neatly and favoring his healing arm. As the music slowed to a waltz, he offered his hand. "I'm no dancer," she said, with a bashful smile. He gave a small bow. "Neither am I, but we can try." They moved in slow, careful circles. Around them, townsfolk smiled and joined in the celebration, lightening months of tension. As they danced, Nora felt contentment settle deep in her chest. Not the dizzying love she once imagined, but something steadier, real. Later, under the stars, they stood outside the hotel. The desert air was cool, the sky endless above them. Franklin turned to her. "Are you happy here?" he asked gently. She met his gaze, firm and sure. "I am. More than I ever thought I'd be." His hand found hers. "Then stay." She nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "I will." In the days that followed, Nora wrote home explaining she would remain in Dry Gulch. There was work still to be done, a town to rebuild, and someone who made her feel seen. She wasn't a runaway bride anymore. She was part of something larger, something that mattered. Looking down Main Street, where townspeople tipped their hats and children laughed in the sun, Nora felt hope stir. The West would never be easy, but in this wild land, she'd found her footing. And maybe, just maybe, she'd found love too. Thank you for following Nora Thompson's remarkable journey from a betrayed mail-order bride to a courageous force for justice in Dry Gulch. Through heartbreak and perilous twists, she discovered a purpose greater than any wedding vow could have promised, and an unexpected chance at love with Sheriff Franklin Wade. In the aftermath of tyranny, the town heals slowly. But Nora's story reminds us all that strength can bloom in the midst of adversity, and hope can flourish where we least expect it. If you've been captivated by Nora's resilience and the spirit of the Old West, please show your support. Like this video, share it with friends who also love frontier tales, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting stories of courage, redemption, and the untamed American frontier. Together, let's keep these voices of determination and adventure alive, one story at a time.